Welcome to the show, Vandy Sports, Southeastern 16. Chris Lee joining us here. How are you, Chris? Good to see you, buddy.
Doing well. It's not often I get to come on someone's show and talk about a Vanderbilt win, so it's breaking new territory as of recency. Recently?
What is the week of triumph been like? Have you been?
How are the boards?
Have you been parading around, lording your success over others?
Well, my phone has rung a few more times. There've been a lot more texts, and it's been in all seriousness, it's been nice to cover something other than just what last year was. I mean, you don't get invested when you cover a team if you're doing your job. But I mean, I covered 9 games last year when Vanderbilt played Power 5 teams. The closest they got was 16 points. So those are the seasons you're just like, I've written everything, I've said everything. There's nothing new to add here other than just fill in the blank with a different team. So that part has been nice.
So, I want to talk through the game day atmosphere and sort of what the stadium's going to look like as the season progresses in Clark Lea. But give us some historical perspective. You were giving me some stats before we came on here, but give us some historical perspective. You've covered this team a very long time. Where does a 2-touchdown upset over, and again, Virginia Tech wasn't technically ranked, but that's a team that was many people believed could be a preseason top 25 team. It was by far the biggest weekend in the entire calendar of all of college football in week 1. Any conference, any team, it was the biggest upset. So historically, where does this fall in your mind?
It's the biggest game they've won in a while. I mean, they've won 3 games against the Power 5 this decade, and 2 of them were back-to-back, Florida and Kentucky. I don't think either of those wins was big because at that point you're winding down to 2022 season. Like if you, by some miracle of God, you beat Tennessee, you're 6-6 and you go to a bowl, and we know what happened there. So, too much water under the bridge at that point of the season. This one, like when you win an opener that you're not supposed to win, that you're a 13.5-point underdog, that's when you get some excitement, and the schedule's built in to give them a little bit more. Yeah, I know that it's Alcorn State and Georgia State, but this is a program that's lost to East Tennessee State and UNLV this decade. So you don't want to count your chickens, but it does feel like you win that game. You feel like you win the next 2 and you're 3-0. And if you're a Vanderbilt fan, you don't really at that point much care how you're 3-0. You're just glad that you are. That's one more game than you won last season if you get there. So I think that schedule order here is kind of important. And I mean, I think it's the most significant game they've won this decade.
What did it feel like in the stadium? I know the construction's not done yet, but you could start to, at least from what I was watching on TV, you could start to see how a game day experience was going to be. You could start to see kind of how things were going to feel at either one of those end zones. What was it like?
It's kind of cool. I mean, I know it's not the nicest stadium, but like that place has been the same for 40 something years. I mean, everybody knows about the atmosphere, so I'm not going to go on about that. But like, because you've got that end zone now open, people can actually walk from one side of the stadium to the other, which I'm not sure if you could do last year at all. It just felt like just the building that you're in. I don't know. It just felt cool. I don't know how else to put it. But it's
been a long time since anything at Dudley Field felt cool.
Yeah, I mean, like never, right? I mean, like even when it was new in 80 or 81 or whenever they built it, it was just this big, bowl with an open end cut out. I mean, there was nothing nice or special about it, and now you've actually got something that looks a little different. And I'm looking forward to next year when they've got it finished.
I was over there a couple of weeks ago, and it's certainly, you can see the framework of where like the end zone club is going to be, and like you can start to see it coming together. And that's got to be, again, you can kind of put the perspective on this, but the arc, the 40-year arc you're talking about, but then also within this Clark Lea tenure and within Candace Story-Lee's tenure, like there's sort of all these different factors that are playing together. And can you try to put into perspective what it would mean? Because I think you can make the case that if Clark Lea had another season like last year, that they would have a really tough decision on their hands at the end of the year. And you could argue both ways, that it's the right decision to move on or the wrong decision to move on. But if he were to do something to sort of make it clear what their plan is supposed to be, can you try to put into perspective what that would mean with an administration sort of committed to it, a coach who maybe is showing a little bit of proof of concept, and the excitement around the stadium? I know we're way in front of the horse here, but can you try to put into perspective that feeling and what that would mean relative to 20 years of coverage?
Well, look, it's a money game now, and that's where everything starts. Money for facilities, but more importantly, money for NIL. And I think that was one of the bigger stories, Braden. I think when they got beat by UNLV last year, they realized this plan is not working. This it wasn't even halfway engagement in NIL. I think they thought they could kind of skirt that. That was a large bucket of cold water. And I think from that point on, they were able to be a player in the portal and get some dudes who helped them. Namely Diego Pavia, who was the SEC Player of the Week. They got
he's fun
on the last drive, the play before the miss or the play before the incompletion at the end of the game. Zaylen Wood, transfer from MTSU, got the sack. They had some key guys that they got in the portal step up and make some plays, and it was the difference between them winning and losing. So I think I don't know if this is exactly what you were getting at, but to me, my mind goes to, all right, you can win a few games because nobody wants to throw good money after bad money. Like if they come out and get pounded 44-10, I don't know what you sell, because at that point the coach, nobody's going to give money to that, and then you've got to go hire something. You got to go hire the next guy coming off that. They were like, if that goes badly, they're in a bad spot. Now what you can do is you can say, hey, look, we finally invested in the portal, and look what we did. We won a game we weren't supposed to win. If we keep doing that, we can maybe start chipping away and getting more competitive. And to me, that is the thing that I think is the biggest story coming out of the game, is maybe now you can make a case that you can win a little bit more with the NIL game. And Braden, you and I have been to SEC tournaments for basketball, and Steve, I'm sure you have too. What happened? You go walk outside that arena, and within a quarter mile, you've seen names of at least two families that are big donors to that school on sides of buildings downtown. You have guys who have resources at your disposal, but they got to be able to believe first. And I think that was at least selling the seeds of how you can believe in what they're asking you to do.
Along those lines, so the MTSU kid you mentioned, when and he had a great game. One of the things that struck me was I was sitting there wondering how much in the portal era, in the NIL era, does for kids that are not going to the NFL, and he's one of them. How much for those kids does transferring into a Vanderbilt degree potentially matter? Because that has always struck me as being one of the things that's kind of under leveraged about Vanderbilt sort of in this era.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation right now is that all that matters is money, right? But at some point, I have to think that falls apart with some kids. And you're kind of saying the thing, Steve, that I've been thinking for a while. Like, nobody wants to come to Vanderbilt. I mean, they've had kids that were Rhodes Scholars that went other places that were good football players because they wanted to win football games. Like, if the football had been decent and you've got a 50-50 shot at going to a bowl or better, maybe they land some of those kids. But competitive football players don't want to come and just go through all that you traditionally go through at Vanderbilt. I think, eventually I have to think that the financial playing field is going to kind of level. I mean, I can't, as incompetent as the NCAA is, I can't think that 10 years from now, we're sitting here having these same conversations about poaching and, teams can just buy whatever roster they want. It's going to look more like pro football at some point with caps and things like that. You would think. And then when you've got that, they've got a little card that they can play that nobody else in the SEC can play. 1 degree, heck, maybe 2 degrees. If we're getting the whole 5-year thing now, I'll be interested to see if that can play out. But they've got to be good in football first, or at least competitive, or it just doesn't matter.
So I don't know, I'm sure you've heard this as well. Vanderbilt hired a new strength and conditioning coach, Robert Steiner, over the offseason. And I've heard from a number of different people inside and outside of the program that this guy has done a remarkable job with the program in a very short period of time. My question to you about coverage is, how do you go about figuring out if that is true? Like, we've seen now a result. It's only one. Yeah. You got 11 more games. But how do you know if is it based on camp being different? Is it based on injuries? I mean, how can you tell that is in fact a thing that fans should point to as a reporter? How can you tell that that's a thing that is making a real impact and was part of the success in week 1 against Virginia Tech?
I think injuries is the best predictor in camp. And like this time last year in camp, they had like, I don't know, 12, 15 guys on the sidelines. This camp, it was like 3, 4, 5, and a lot of them were guys that weren't playing anyway. I think that's big. But the thing is, I just don't think you can tell till they play somebody else. Like I remember last year thinking, okay, one thing that really stands out to me about Clark Lea's teams is how well conditioned they were in practice. You didn't see guys with holding hands on hips and things like that. And then you play the first games and they're just getting obliterated off the lines of scrimmage. And you can't really tell physical dominance as much because, okay, if the offensive line isn't dominating physically, maybe the defensive line is better. So I just don't think till they play a game. But I think when they played Saturday, that's one of the things I cited. Like they didn't get pushed around. They didn't get blown out of lanes. That their defense filled their gaps. They out-sacked Virginia Tech 4-2. And one of my talking points post-game was I think strength and conditioning showed up today because they were conditioned, but they also just weren't – the teams weren't able to open the holes against them that they did so much last year. And they got a little push with the offensive line too, which they didn't do a year ago.
One of the ongoing conspiracies around the team this year is Diego Pavia's height. Is he? There is no way.
I don't think this is as big a conspiracy as you think.
No way. He is 6 feet tall, and I have looked for like I went down a rabbit hole looking for like old like high school records or something like that where he would be listed as something shorter, and then magically when he got to college he was 6 foot. He's not 6 foot, is he?
Nope.
Steve, I'm allegedly 5'11", and I'm pretty sure I'm an inch taller than he is.
I think that's generous.
Like I said, allegedly.
So who's there's like a third or fourth or fifth string quarterback on the roster who's like listed at like 5'8", right?
Yeah.
Who am I? I'm drawing a blank on the young man's name.
It would have to be 8 guys down because they've got 6 or 7.
So they've got a guy listed. They've got a guy listed, Steve, at like 5'9". And that yet when you list somebody at 5'9", you're short,
right?
And I saw them standing next to each other in practice, and I'm not sure Diego Pavia was taller than him.
No,
yeah.
And I was there with my own eyes. I don't need sources. I don't need a sheet. I just saw it.
What's going to the strength and conditioning portion of this though? What's going to happen when he hits SEC lines? That's what I was interested in Virginia Tech because
Steve, he beat Auburn on the road last year.
Okay.
My dog is not liking this. My fault.
I would just like to point.
Is he a little dog?
Yes, he's about 25 pounds.
I would just like to point out that a lot of people have beaten Auburn recently.
Oh,
well,
fair enough.
But I do think you've asked the key question, though. I really do.
It is when he gets to the. I mean, I looked at Tennessee's lines on Saturday, and those are big boy lines. The Alabama line in Saban's absence has not gotten any smaller. What's going to happen when they face off against somebody like that? And part of the great thing on Saturday was his ability to move the ball with his feet, and was just it saved Vanderbilt on a couple of drives. Was something that was very clearly unexpected from Virginia Tech. They did not have an answer for certain portions of the game for him.
Yeah, you've asked the question that I was asking myself Monday is like, okay, it looks like it could be a fun season, but if he's out, I don't see much of a path. Now we'll say that he's pretty well put together. And I think he's used to doing this. I would think that, maybe they're going to be smart with him and say, hey, buddy, if it's, 3rd and 10 and you got the first down and there's a defender coming down on you, then
slide,
get
baby,
out of bounds or slide or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think behind him, it's not really pretty. Nate Johnson can run, but the throwing was not good in camp. Those things are always kind of flukish, though. Like, I remember standing next to Jaden Daniels last year at SEC Media Day and just thinking there is no freaking way you were getting through this season without getting hurt because he's so slim, and we know the rest of that story. So I mean,
Bryce
there's a
Young,
luck.
Bryce Young's the
What's
same
that?
way. Bryce Young's
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
way.
I mean,
Yeah.
right. And Nico is not the thickest guy around either. I mean, I worry about Tennessee if he gets hurt. They're going to be not in the same situation with Vandy, but the drop off is big. But I mean, yeah, I mean that's the $1 million question is how they protect him. I think you would like to get a big lead in the next 2 weeks going into Missouri to where you can get him out of the game to minimize your risk. But I think if he gets hurt, a lot of the air goes out of the balloon.
So he is an answer to the sort of this question potentially, which is this cul-de-sac I feel like we are in with Vanderbilt, the same exact sort of back and forth conversation, which is, well, expectations at Vanderbilt versus the coach versus the future versus spending versus money versus investment versus NIL. Like like the one thing we talk about just kind of changes, but the story seems to stay the same. James Franklin certainly changed that. Some of that is the environment around Vanderbilt at the time, but some of that is the job he did. Is a player like Pavia the thing that breaks the cycle? Is it just a guy like that does this? Is it have to come on the backs of all of the other conversations we've had about investment and spending in the university and stadium, or is it just a great player? Is that the thing that changes and ends our sort of loop-de-loop of conversation here, the Ouroboros of Vanderbilt football, if you will?
Well, look, that's up to them. I mean, traditionally, when they get a moment, they don't capitalize on it. They did nothing with James Franklin's momentum. And you saw, I mean, they haven't had a winning season since he left. So, I mean, I think, you know, the one thing that could change is back to NIL, because if Vanderbilt decides it wants to be a player, you've got guys that can write checks as big as anybody's, but you got to show proof of concept. But I mean, I will go shorter term, and this isn't exactly what you asked, but like if I'm Vanderbilt, Braden, I'm getting out. I'm promoting the heck out of this kid.
Yeah.
I'm getting Hispanic communities. I'm giving them tickets to games. I'm giving them, you know, T-shirt, jerseys, whatever you can do to build a fan base. Because the one bad thing about Saturday was that crowd was awful in terms of they didn't have 10,000 fans in the stands. It got to the point to where, like, there were a couple plays late in the game where when you're writing and doing things, sometimes you don't always see where the official makes the signal. And there are a couple plays I'm like, was that a touchdown? And I didn't see the signal. And usually the crowd validates you. Like they let you know because you hear a roar and like, okay, well, there's my answer. And we had the press box window open. There were a couple times I just couldn't tell because there wasn't the audible reaction from the fan base. And to me, you've got to start in the short term. I think the long term, who knows, right? Because we don't even know what it's going to look like a month from now, a year from now, whatever. But in the short term, I feel like they need to be making something of this if they are going to bridge it to whatever's around the corner. And traditionally, they just don't.
The ESPN crew was not only historically bad, it was one of the worst crews I've ever heard. But it was also, they were pretty disingenuous about the crowd. And now the camera placement meant that you saw all the Virginia Tech fans on the other side. But they kept referring to as, you know, it's a sellout or it's a packed house here at Vanderbilt. And, you know, and they were trying to hype it up and talking about the new stadium and whatever else. But I mean, it was the same situation that we've seen in years past, that, you know, it was packed with somebody else's fans.
Yeah.
What do you think a win does for the first at the start of the season to change that? You think that makes a few more people curious?
It makes them more curious. My question is, does it get them in the stands? I think they've got a great opportunity. Again, I'd be out giving away tickets. Now, your counterpoint to this is they're playing Alcorn State at 6:30 at night. There's more stuff to do in Nashville on Friday night if you're a casual fan. If you're a college football fan, I don't know what the night schedule looks like, but I'm sure there's more compelling games to stay home and watch TV unless
Tennessee,
unless you got direct TV. Yeah. Well, that might hurt a little bit, but you know, typically your person that's a Tennessee fan isn't going to come to a Vandy game regardless. Like that's probably a non-factor. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Tradition. I don't know of any efforts they're making. I asked Clark Lea about it yesterday. He said, "Well, that's in so many polite words. That's kind of somebody else's job," which I partly agree with and partly don't. But yeah, I mean, that's the question. If it's me, I'm making it into something. But we'll see what that looks like.
James Franklin disagrees.
So he does strongly. Yeah.
So that brings up an interesting question though about Clark Lea, because sometimes the guy who is right for the job and is going to do a great job is not the spokesman or the salesman for the brand and for the product. And Vanderbilt has always needed someone to do more than just be a great coach to try to sell. Now, you could also argue, hey, James Franklin was the perfect salesman and had a great team and relative to Vanderbilt standards and still couldn't sell out the stadium. And that's just the battle that they fight. Does it matter at all that Clark Lea is sort of, he's this cerebral, smart, really thoughtful guy, great relationships with his players, but is not the guy who's going to go up there and wow people at SEC Media Days in front of the podium. He's not the rah-rah guy who's going to sort of like inspire a bunch of action in the community. I mean, Diego Pavia is a fun player to watch and root for. He is going to be fun for this team as long as he's on the field. That's a sellable commodity. Does the Vanderbilt coach have to have all those other skills in your mind?
Well, traditionally, like I'll give you an example. Bill Snyder at Kansas State, that program was worse than Vanderbilt, if you can believe it, when he took over. Clark Lea looks charismatic compared to Bill Snyder, and it worked. Sometimes there are people that can make it work within that.
Yeah.
But the game has now changed too. And I think maybe that's your argument with Clark, but I mean, so much has changed since he took the job over, right? I mean, 2020 might as well be, 1940 almost with NIL and the portal. And I don't know. I feel like, but that's also the problem, Braden. Like Franklin, as tough as that job was, and he didn't have to deal with those things too, right? I mean, you had when Clark came in, the culture was awful. He had to do a lot of things to just rebuild that, just get confidence, just keep people there. And then all the other things that got sprung on college football got sprung on him when he's just trying to deal with things that probably no other coach in the country is. Now, I'm probably at the same time, I do think he should probably doing a little bit more and maybe taking that more seriously. But at the same time, the job is somehow tougher than it was when he took it too. So you've only got so much time in the day.
What if we went the other direction here, though? What if there's a new Superman movie coming out? What if we went full supervillain, branded him as like the Lex Luthor of college football here? He's already got the dome, and leaned hard into the villainy sort of piece of it. I'm sure there are large segments of the Vanderbilt a fan base that would love that. That would love to have to be hated as opposed to indifferent from most of the SEC fan bases.
Well, if you mean Clark specifically, I don't know that I quite see that. Now, James Franklin could have pulled that off. But
Steve, Chris, Steve has obviously never met Clark Lea.
I know. I mean, I know that he's not. His personality does not scream supervillain. But I mean, it's just a branding thing. I mean, come on, we can.
Doesn't even whisper it.
Get him some media coaching.
He's too like a big ask.
He's too NBA Vandy Notre Dame to be that.
Yeah, that's right.
Although maybe the Notre Dame thing is how you become a villain. I was just
going to say, NBA kids have been hated by most of the other athletes here in town for a long time. So maybe he should just lean into it.
Right.
All right. Has expectation have you changed as someone who's got historical institutional knowledge, someone who knows this particular regime well, someone who knows the schedule and the roster and all the challenges? And yes, even the camera angles are challenging now for Vanderbilt fans. What has anything changed because of the first game, or is it still all right if they can get to a couple of wins over some FCS teams and maybe put together a couple of challenges in conference that would be deemed a major step forward in success? Or do you actually have different expectations?
I had him 3-9 going into the game. I didn't have Virginia Tech as a win. I think I would go. Obviously, you have to go at least 4 now. I'd probably go 5. I mean, they might be able to pick off South Carolina, given the way they look, but that game was a long way away. Carolina's owned them in that series too, guys. They hadn't won that once. They played every year since 2008, and I think the last time Vanderbilt won was 2007 or 2008, and they played every year. So now some of it have been close, but I mean, you have to change your expectations. I said before the game, Braden, I think if they win this game, it looks like remember Bobby Johnson's 2008 team? They couldn't move the ball against anybody, but they'd get a timely turnover or a big punt, and they'd eke out, like they won the Music City Bowl, and for crying out loud, their punter was the MVP. because he punted a touchdown, basically. And I was just like, that's what they're probably going to have to do realistically, based on what I'd seen on offense. I didn't know they were going to be that much fun to watch. I mean, the offense got a lot better between the end of fall camp and whatever they did. Maybe Pavia's just one of those guys that you see guys, Braden, you played with guys, and they were terrible practice players, but when the lights came on, something happened. So I don't know. I just didn't. I thought if they won that game, it would be one of those kind of flukish things where they got outgained, 400 to 195, but they made a play, when they had to. And several people that when I've been on radio, one thing that stood out, people have said, hey, they look like the better team in that game. I didn't really expect that. And so to me, I think you've got to revise your expectations at this point.
Well, and if the coach, like I'm okay with the coach sort of being a head down sort of guy, because that's how you kind of have to do that to be successful. But I'm not kidding about this. Like, I cannot remember a player at quarterback. Now, look, I thought he would be fun. I said this to the folks at Vanderbilt at practice. I was like, this guy is going to be fun to watch. Everyone's going to love this guy. And, again, if you watched him at New Mexico State, it was obvious how much fun this guy is. I can't remember a player. Like, they had some really star players, especially at receiver, Jordan Matthews and Zach Stacy. Like, they had guys that people gravitated towards, but never a guy under center that was, I think, just truly just pure entertainment. And they've got to figure out a way to market that, because he is truly, if you're a college football fan and you've not watched him, you are going to enjoy watching him, even if you're not a Vanderbilt fan.
Braden, he's like a point guard playing quarterback.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And it transcends like the play that the tying score, the one they got, the 8-yard touchdown pass to Alexander. He's running kind of inside the hash. It looks like he can cut in and maybe get to the 3, put his head down. And he looks to his left. You've got a safety or an outside linebacker in the flat. And he figures out just like that, hey, I got one guy out here. If I take the play outside, and if he runs it, then okay, he might get tackled. It's who can win a one-on-one battle. But he figured out, and go watch it again. It's impressive how quickly he made a decision. He just flips his hips and slings the ball, and Alexander gets an easy touchdown. I don't think you can teach that improvisational, just split-second decision where a guy does something that you're just not expecting. And I think that's what makes him special. That will get him in trouble at times. They nearly fumbled the ball away inside the 10 where it was a lateral that went out of bounds, and they got the benefit of the advanced spot. So that's the other side of the coin, is sometimes that happens. But look, they don't have a huge margin for error. And I think when you got to defend a guy like that, you just don't know what's coming.
Were he and Jerry Kill a package deal?
I don't know. But I mean, look, when you bring in, people were trying to, well, who's going to win the quarterback battle? Like, well, wait a minute. Let's unpack this for a minute. They brought in their offensive coordinator. They brought in their head coaches and analysts. And which quarterback do you think is going to end up with the job? I don't know how all that went. I was shocked when it happened. That was one thing. If you want to talk about how this can be different, look, this was a kid that started out. He had no offers. He went to a JUCO, and New Mexico State is not, Virginia or Wake Forest or someone. I mean, like if you say Vandy's going to get a kid who started his career as a JUCO coming from New Mexico State to be their quarterback, I'm like, okay, that's probably getting a couple of favors from admissions that you usually don't get.
Well, look, I am not going to be the one that compares him to another short athletic quarterback who wore number 2 for Texas A&M a while ago. I'm not going to be that guy.
Good.
But he's super fun to watch. No. I didn't say but. I didn't say but about him. Here's the deal. I will drive the hype train, and I will be #1 fan club for Diego Pavia. He's a fun player. People should invest in watching him while they've got him here in town. That's it. That's all.
Or until somebody breaks him in half.
Stop it. Chris, thank you so much. Of course, where can everybody catch all of your work? Oh, Steve, you got more? Okay, go ahead.
I have a non-Vanderbilt question.
Ooh.
Okay.
Are you at least a little Derek Mason curious about what's happening in Murfreesboro? And are you going to watch an MTSU game or two this year?
If I've got nothing else going on and amidst the billion SEC, I mean, look, I honestly, I root for Derek. I think, I think he's one of the good people in coaching. Now, I think he's going to a situation where they've got about as many resource challenges as Vanderbilt does, and I don't know how that's going to go. They barely got by Tennessee Tech, which probably isn't a great sign, and then they got Ole Miss this week, and that won't be pretty. But I mean, I'll be watching a little bit, at least following scores. I hope he does well.
Yeah, he was out at Titans camp a few times. There's a lot of challenges in that program for sure.
Yeah.
And to your point about the Vanderbilt job getting more difficult with all the rule changes, it trickles down even in an even greater way to schools at that level. So, but Vanderbilt fans, there's no way if something good happens or something bad happens that they're not going to be talking about it on the boards. Like Vanderbilt fans are keeping an eye on it. There's no question about that. All right, well, tell everybody you got Southeastern 16, you got VandySports.com. Tell everybody where they can find you and all the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, Vandy Sports is pretty self-explanatory. Just search for that online for the website. You'll get the podcast that way too, part of your network, Braden at 440 Sports. Southeastern 16, go to YouTube, just search that. What we do, I always tell people, if you're just following your team, your local beat writer will do a better job of that. But if you want somebody to break it all down and tell you how the 16 stack up against other people, I think we're as good as anybody with that. We cover football, baseball, basketball year-round. Case in point, I'll be leaving to do an off-season baseball podcast about summer ball here in a minute. So we really never stop year-round in all three sports.
There you have it. Chris, always a pleasure, my friend. Great to see you. And everybody, Diego Pavia, baby. Let's go. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.